Aloha, my name is Anna Covert, and this week on the Covert Code, the topic is why great ideas don't need Silicon Valley to succeed. And my special guest is David Blivin, founder and managing director for Cottonwood Technology Funds and author of Crossing the Cactus, where he shares practical roadmaps for commercializing innovation and building sustainable tech ecosystems beyond traditional hubs. Thanks so much for being here with me today, Dave.
Thank you, Anna. I'm looking forward to it.
So to kick us off, I like all the guests to go through the Cliff Notes version. You have a very interesting background. How did you get from where you were to where you are today?
Okay, well, I started originally in just regular kind of CPA accounting, but I got my MBA at Duke. And after getting out of Duke, I worked for what would be called a merchant bank, which we did like real estate and leverage buyouts, so kind of bigger transactions. I was the CFO, but we were based there in the Research Triangle Park. And because of the Research Triangle Park, there was, a steady stream of kind of startups and entrepreneurs looking for capital. Because we were known as investors, they would always want to approach us, see if we were interested in investing in their company. This is back in the kind of early 1990s. And I would usually be the one to meet with them because I was the CFO, and I would explain to them that we didn't do that kind of investing, and refer them to some other folks that might, and they would almost always come back. So we met with those three folks. Who else can we meet with? And that ultimately led me to understanding there really wasn't a lot of early stage kind of technology focused capital based in the Research Triangle Park, even though it was known as a research center and a technology center, and really in the Southeast in general. And so ultimately me and my boss and another entrepreneur started a fund trying to be helpful. That involved to a second fund, and at that time I left to really focus full-time on venture capital and building that fund. And we focused on kind of what I'll call the I-85 corridor, but kind of Research Triangle Park all the way through Atlanta. And we focused on technology companies that were starting in that region. And we ultimately became the largest fund in the region at that time. And then I sold my interest. My wife is from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she talked me into relocating to be closer to her family. And I started over with Cottonwood, and so Cottonwood is similarly technology focused, early stage. We focus on Cottonwood a little bit more what I'll call hard tech, science related innovation, not just software. We really don't do software. So we look for stuff that can be patented and protected and is truly unique. And Cottonwood now, we're on our fourth fund. We focus on the region, so kind of New Mexico, surrounding states. I'm based in Denver now, but I still have an office and a partner in Santa Fe. And then about 10 years ago, we expanded into Europe, into the Netherlands, and I have three partners in the Netherlands focused on kind of that region, the say Netherlands surrounding countries like Germany, France, Belgium, etc. So we're doing the same thing there, hard tech, early stage, trying to help companies with, we think, disruptive ideas get started and grow through, raising additional capital, building their teams, and opening doors to the theoretical customers for those technologies.
Wow, that's a very interesting story. So before we talk about your book, which I'm very excited to hear more about, have you seen a big trend? I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on, at least I've seen in my technology sphere, of what people are willing to invest in. And it seemed like earlier on, even 10, 15 years ago, there was more interest and hunger to really invest in ideas that were maybe, in the middle. It's like a lot of time now it seems like people only want something that is brand new, like the, beta, or it's like it's basically making revenue already. There's like little appetite for that kind of middle of research. And what are your thoughts on why some things have changed and why people, what is going on with the choice of what we invest in today?
Well, in the venture capital area, I would say like Back to the Future or whatever, but the venture industry really started with hard tech. Really, it started with Silicon Valley, which is based on silicon, semiconductor chips. And so initially it was mostly hardware, materials and semiconductor processes and applications for semiconductors, et cetera. That's evolved. That's what's really evolved is it's really moved more towards soft tech. If you think about software as a service, or if you think about artificial intelligence right now is a kind of a hot area. And so there's this kind of continuing wave of new hot areas, of course, with the .com originally, which is back when I started my first funds, it was more of a .com kind of telco focused. And so a lot of even the traditional funds that started on hard tech have shifted more to what I'll call soft tech, largely because it takes less capital to get started. You can test the market much more quicker. You can scale, like with the stuff that we invest in, you have to manufacture the products. And so the cost to set up manufacturing is capital intensive. And whereas with software, you just, add more servers or whatever and scale.
More marketing,
Right. So there's been a shift because you can scale quicker, you can exit quicker. You don't have to really build a company necessarily all the way to, 50 to 100 million in revenues. In the hard tech, you tend to now have to do that. When I first got in venture, you could kind of prove new technology and it was unique and potentially strategic to one of the big companies. And they would tend to buy the company early, and they would have the people on their teams that could finish the technology, take it to market, or integrate it with their other products. Most big companies today don't really have those resources. I mean, you think way back to like Bell Labs or Xerox PARC, a lot of the biggest companies had their own research efforts. Those no longer really exist. They mostly outsource innovation today with either partnering with labs or partnering with the venture community. Almost every big company today has a venture group. They make direct investments in companies. They make investments in funds in a lot of cases to get access to new innovation. So I would say the biggest shift has been more towards soft tech and away from hard tech. So that's where we're focused. And you're starting to see a little bit of a shift back. I mean, I think there's starting to be a little bit of a recognition that if you have AI or what at one point there was like Internet of Things, IoT was kind of a big fad for a while.
Yeah.
But you still need things, right? The Internet of Things, you still need things. And you still need computers and chips and things that can actually enable AI to run. Or if you go to quantum, right, you still need like real computers and products that can make those things happen. So that's where we focus. And increasingly, like I said, there's more attention here. And so, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We see a lot of really cool ideas and we try to help companies get started right at the beginning, even before they have a first prototype in some cases.
That's awesome. Have you ever been to the new, in Vegas, they have every year, they have the
CES?
Yes.
CES, yeah, Consumer Electronics Show.
It's so fun.
I've been. It's a little bit overwhelming. I don't know if you've ever been.
I have been, and I was just going to say that I went 3 or 4 years ago when they were just releasing some of like the robot dogs and and things like that, and I was just blown away with what I was experiencing.
Yeah, it's insane to go there and just see how many different ideas across all different applications. And so, yeah, we've been in, a lot of our companies go. And we don't tend to sell directly to consumers. So we're selling to the companies that are selling to consumers, in terms of, like I said, new materials or chips or things like that.
Yeah. So how are the tariffs impacting what you're doing at all?
Well, most of our companies are still U.S. or even in Europe. The tariffs are not, I would say on the margin, not really yet. I mean, we have some companies that are sourcing out of, we're sourcing out of China and still are to some extent. So some of that was impacting initially, but most of them have been able to find alternative sources of suppliers and mitigate a lot of the tariff impact that they might have felt at one point.
Yeah, because I can imagine that being a big pill to swallow if you're in the middle of manufacturing, right?
It does put some pressure, on companies to find more suppliers in the U.S. or in countries that are less tariff impacted, that are, kind of friends of the U.S., if you will.
Yeah, sure.
So there's been a little bit of pressure there. And I think in general, there's been a trend since COVID really to become more self-sufficient, as like almost every country is working on being more self-sufficient, less dependent on other countries, and certainly less dependent on other countries that might be hostile. Even though, historically cheap was always better, and it didn't matter wherever the cheapest labor was, that's where manufacturing went. Or even oil and gas production, right? We've kind of partnered with a lot of countries historically for our oil and gas that weren't necessarily our best friends. And you're seeing all of that, and every country is working on that to try to be a little bit more self-sufficient.
Yeah. So are you, like, when you pick an investment opportunity, are you looking at like a economic, social, governance score as a factor to decide, how are they up the best company? Or
Well, I would say we don't have, like, there's a lot of what we'd call like ESG focused companies, right? I wouldn't say we're ESG focused. We're focused on impact. Having said that, if you have a big impact, you almost always have a big ESG score as well, because you're reducing. Like, we have a semiconductor company that reduces the power required for, like, if you think about AI, right? How much power that takes. If you can produce chips that require less power. We have an electric motor company that takes less power for HVAC and other industrial applications for electric motors. So, we're looking at the market need for that, but not so much driven by the fact of the carbon impact, just more driven by the economics. But the byproduct is you do have a big positive economic impact. And we have some health tech related companies on personalized medicine. That's a little bit easier to see the impact on people, right? If you can, these are both kind of early genomics diagnostic testing, and we have a semiconductor company for kind of health monitoring and telehealth, and all of that. Of course, if you're successful, has a big impact on people's lives.
It does. Yeah. It's amazing what we can do just to even monitor people in remote areas with your iPhone, and being able to see a doctor and breathing into a device, and, just changing everything. They're monitoring the blood glucose from afar, a distance. And it's things like that are just game changers.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of I guess, real-time monitoring, right? Even with your Apple Watch or Fitbit or whatever comes out next. Your watch is monitoring your heart rate every second, right? So, that data in the hands of AI or in a telehealth application or whatever, your breathing rate, things like that. Even with my Apple Watch, if I fall down, it immediately asks me, "Are you okay?" And
Like,
if I'm not,
for that commercial to get,
911 gets called, and my wife gets called, and so that's happening today. So it's hard to even imagine how much better it's going to get in terms of early detection and real-time kind of health diagnostics that can really feed into health, treatments and predictive and even preventative health approaches.
Absolutely. There's always always the other side of that coin too, of what kind of risks there might be for people who do subscribe. Like, we've seen in the government taking data for women, measuring or monitoring their flow, and using that in ways to, infer that maybe they were pregnant, right? We won't get into all that, but there's both sides of this tracking, right? That's possible. And I read about a lot of those things in my book. So on that note, let's switch and talk about your book, The Crossing the Cactus. It was recently published.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me about it. What made you think that now is the time to write a book, and what's it about?
Yeah, it's been a book that's been, I originally drafted an abstract of 12 or 13 chapters, probably 7-8 years ago.
Wow.
It's just sort of kind of getting my thoughts down and it's really a byproduct of my experience in the Southeast, as I mentioned earlier, but then here in the Southwest and also in Europe. And and working in these kind of what I'll call under-resourced areas compared to like Silicon Valley or Boston or some other areas that have a lot more capital, a lot more history of successful startups. What you realize is you also have to kind of get involved in helping build the ecosystem that can help your companies be successful. So, in the Southeast, I got involved in a number of efforts, like even a direct flight from Research Triangle Park to San Jose, California, to connect directly, because that actually ends up being a big factor on the sharing of information, on the sharing of capital, is the ease of connection physically. And so I got behind an effort, really led an effort to create that flight, which successfully occurred. And in New Mexico, same thing, doing things around some of the public policy kind of choices that states can make to help their companies have a better chance of being successful, essentially, right? In terms of there's things like angel tax credits, there's things like SBIR matching funds that can help these companies kind of get off the ground. Of course, capital, that's what I'm focused on to a large extent, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and why I think that's kind of a key in many cases to bringing the other two pieces together, people and ideas. And so what I've found over time is that there's great ideas everywhere. They were in the Southeast, they're in the Southwest, they're in Europe. Of course, they're in Silicon Valley. It's not to say they're not there, but they're really everywhere. What's not everywhere is money and management. And so you really need all three things to really have a chance at building a successful company. And so this book is written, I think, less for investors or less for companies. You're kind of, if you're an investor or your company, you're kind of, I would say, stuck in the environment that you're in, or you can always choose to move to another environment. But if you're a state or a city or a country, if you talk to anybody in those leadership positions, they will always talk about tech commercialization as a pathway to job creation and economic diversification. And so it's been well known, and it's been a focus of these different states and countries for a long time. How do we identify more of the compelling ideas at our national labs, at our research universities, or in our ecosystem, spinning out of corporations, if you will, that are based in those countries? How do we find more of these? How do we support them? How do we keep them? I think that's the biggest question in many cases is, how do you keep those companies in your state or in your city or in your country? Because the easy thing early, and what you see almost anywhere in these kind of under-resourced areas, the universities or national labs, a super high percentage of what would be called their technology licenses, where they're licensing their IP to others to develop, because they don't actually develop, of course, the end products. They're just doing the research. Almost all of it gets licensed out of state. And so some of the best ideas never create a job in the state of origin, if you will, because they get licensed to IBM or Cisco or General Motors, whatever the technology might be. And those companies aren't based in their state. Or even if they're licensed to a startup, they might not be licensed to a startup that's based in their state. But most would state publicly that that's their goal, is to help create more startups in their state. And that's kind of what the focus on this book is sort of, let's assume you have those great ideas. And in most cases, almost every case, you do. So you don't have to necessarily create the ideas. They're already being created out of the ecosystem. But in most cases, you don't have the money or the management to identify those companies or those ideas, create companies, but then again, keep them in your state and create jobs and create economic impact in your state. So that's been sort of the focus of this book, is more from an economic development standpoint, just because I've gotten involved in that everywhere I've invested, somewhat by necessity and somewhat by just sort of what they call an enlightened self-interest, right? If, it's for everybody's benefit, but it's certainly going to benefit our companies as well, and companies that will invest in the future. So if we can create a better ecosystem and environment for startups, it helps us, it helps everybody.
Yeah, no, I think that's really very interesting. It makes me think of we do a lot of work in solar, and one of the initiatives that was from Washington State, they created this was back 30 years ago, they created a fund because they wanted to create more jobs in Washington for panel and solar manufacturing, right? So they had one of the most attractive tax credits ever, right? But you had to have the panel made there and the inverter made there, and then and it did all those things. It got jobs and it created a big opportunity. But on the flip side of it, what happened was the consumer, because there was so many tax credits, they were paying a high price, right? Just kind of what happens when, right? Well, we see that in all industries. That's not just solar or tax credits. I mean, anything subsidized, they have to increase the price, right? But that kind of happened, and it was really exciting for the people in Washington. The installers, they went and they didn't want Sunrun at the time. They wanted to come in and sell a lease, but they would have eaten up this fund, and that wasn't the purpose of the fund. Right? The purpose of the fund was to keep the jobs, in that state. So I think you're right. There's a lot of probably things that even do help people create not only or when you're attracting an investor to an opportunity, is that one of your strategies of how to find a local, and that's why you pick regions, so that you pick people who are highly motivated to invest and keep it right there in that location?
Well, certainly to start, I would say proximity is the number one factor on early stage investing. I mean, a lot of times now, whether it's soft tech or hard tech, there's a lot of angel groups that have been created because the venture industry, the most successful funds have grown. The better you do, the more people want to invest in your fund. And the natural tendency is to grow the size of the fund. But when you do that, you generally shift your focus to later stage investments, because now you have so much money, you can't manage $100 million investments. You want to manage, $20 or $35 million investments or something. So what's happened over time is it leaves a gap at the early stage, which has been filled partly by angel groups and high net worth individuals. And then, that's what we do as Cottonwood. We're more of an organized angel group as a single investment vehicle. But we've got investors that are, high net worth, family office, but also some states or countries that are trying to support innovation early, and even some corporations that have their own venture groups. But as I mentioned earlier, by investing in funds like ours, they can get access to earlier ideas, particularly when they come from regions that they may not really have good coverage of. So a lot of corporations, in California, they can get good visibility into new ideas, or, Boston or whatever, but an area like the Southwest or, Northwest Europe, they may not have as good a visibility. So by partnering with us, we find ideas that could be relevant to them, and we might invest earlier. In fact, most cases we would invest earlier than they would, because we'll invest helping build the first prototype. They want to see a prototype before they want to see that what you're talking about actually can work and does work, and that there's a credible path to a product that they could buy in the future. So that's what's happening in terms of capital. And so, the early capital, I think, has to be close to the ideas. And that's where I think a lot of states can benefit by creating more sources of capital based in their state, because capital, I used to hear this all the time, even in North Carolina back in the mid-'90s when I first started that fund. A lot of technology companies, compelling technology, they would come to me and they say, "Hey, we got some investor interest, but they want us to move to California, or they want to move to Boston," right? So it's like, and we don't really want to move. So would you invest? Let us stay here. And I think, they have families there, they have kids in school, and at the earliest stages, though, when you only have one or two people, moving is an option for a lot of people, right? So, again, as a state, keeping these ideas in state or in country does require capital. In most cases, that is physically located in the state itself, or at least has a regional focus, and so at least a percentage of their investments will be made in companies in that state. And then the other thing that I, ultimately, you're probably going to get to this, but I'll jump ahead a little bit. I mean, the other part is the people part. Because at the end of the day, technology doesn't do anything by itself, right? And money doesn't do anything by itself. People have to do, right? So people,
you have to spend it, right? Just kidding.
people have to make the investment decisions,
Right.
but people have to ultimately build a company. And again, if you're in a region that hasn't had a long history of venture-backed growth companies, whether it's soft tech or hard tech, you don't likely have a deep pool of experienced managers that can step in and run those companies. And so that's, that's one of the biggest factors in companies moving, probably in some ways bigger than the money part of it, is
Right.
part of it.
Makes sense. Yeah, I never thought of that.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I think states overlook the most, because if you say, well, the ideas are here, that's a given, and then you can help create more sources of capital, right? Like a Cottonwood, or other funds like Cottonwood that would be based in the state or have a regional focus. But then if you don't focus on the people part, that can all kind of fall apart. And so, one of the things I talk about in the book is, you need all three things. You could solve for any of the three. Again, you don't really necessarily have to solve for ideas. Obviously, you can create better, what they call endowed chairs at your universities and things like that. Could be a catalyst for more ideas coming out of the university or national lab or whatever. You can create sources of capital. People are a little bit harder, right? Because people, if they're not already there, they're not necessarily inclined to move there unless it's a good opportunity, unless it meets some other criteria. But that's been our strategy to a large extent, is to get people to follow money. So rather, when I first got in the business, started learning about, what other funds did and how they made their investment decisions, I would always hear money follows management. But, these were funds out of Boston or California. They had lots of management from prior successes that had occurred. And I was like, well, I'm in the Southeast or I'm in the Southwest. What am I going to do? There is no real experienced management. There's not a history of these venture-backed companies that have grown and gone public or been acquired. And now those managers are looking for new opportunity. So I eventually kind of figured out, well, maybe I can get management to follow money. And what that means from a practical standpoint, if we go back to what I was talking about, angels and high net worth, the tendency early is to invest $250,000 to $500,000 on average in a new company by these angel groups. And that's not enough to recruit a business person. And so, especially on the hard tech side, most hard tech companies are started by the scientists, the inventors.
Right.
And they have, surprising to me, we're doing these things that are really crazy new ideas, never been done about 24 of them. 100% of the time, they have successfully built working prototypes, working proof of concepts, demonstrations of the technology. And so it's not about, can the scientists build the product? I've learned that over time. They almost always can.
Wow. It's impressive.
But that doesn't mean we have 100% successful companies, because we get to the part I'm talking about now, which is people. And so if you don't have a real business person ultimately connected to these companies, it's hard to raise the next round of funding. We'll invest before there's a real business person. We'll invest on the idea. We'll help build a prototype. The next round investors are going to put up somewhere between, say, 5 and 15 million. They want someone in the company that has run a company, built a company before. And if you don't have that person in there, might be the greatest idea, might be the greatest market opportunity, they're still going to be resistant to investing because they don't have someone there they believe knows how to build a company with the money that they might be willing to invest. And so that's the biggest thing that we have to solve for almost always in every one of our companies is compelling science, compelling market opportunity. How do we get someone in here that understands from a business standpoint, what is a market entry strategy that'll work? What's the business model that'll work? Those kinds of things that are going to be the questions of the next round investors. And even to do a business deal with a customer, you need a business person to, be able to translate sort of the technology and the application of the technology to what is the business, right? How much you're going to pay for this? Why are you going to pay this? Are we going to make money at this price? What's the competitive landscape? How do we compete with the other? So you need that kind of business thinking, and we can help with that from a board standpoint. But nobody's going to invest because we're on the board. They want to know who's running the company, right? So that's the biggest challenge. One other quick thing, because I know you probably have some more questions, so I don't want to dominate this conversation. But going back to this risk, if I look at our companies in New Mexico in particular, over time, we've made 7 or 8 investments in New Mexico-based companies. And at least 6 of those have raised enough money that we have raised, been successful at raising, 15, 20 million. And in those companies, in most cases, we've gone to the market, done a national search for, next level management team, particularly with the CEO search, was pretty typical in the industry, is get someone who's done this before at the next level. 100% of the time that we've successfully recruited, in fact, we've been successful in every case, but 100% of the time, the person that we thought was the best, and we want to pick the best available, was not based in New Mexico. And 100% of the time, they've moved the company out of New Mexico over time as they've built the rest of their team and looked for manufacturing or lab space, looked for the rest of the executive team. And so just gets back to, from a state strategy or city strategy or country strategy, it's not just good enough to have, say, the ideas and the money. You also have to have a strategy around people. People at the end of the day are the key.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great explanation. It reminds me of something that I've been through. So I have a technology company. It's called Reactium, and it's an open source framework. And so I have 2 business partners, and they were both part of the IBM walkout. So they're both developers. And,
right.
7 years ago, 8 years ago, IBM said, oh, it doesn't matter if you are in Acapulco. If you write a line of code, it belongs to IBM. And about 100 people disagreed, and they all walked out. So 2 of them are my business partners in this framework. This is open source. And so I was working with Cam, we're still partners now on another project. And he gives me a call one day. He says, hey, we have this company, and it's open source now. There's about 100,000 people using it. And we want to give you 30% of the company because we don't want to talk to anyone, right? They're developers, right? Just like the scientists.
Right.
Wait, what? Hold on. Can you rewind? But yeah, it's like we just want to make, and I quote, cool shit. And we don't want to do taxes. We don't want to do any business. And we'll just give you 30% if you just do it. Right. And so I think that, yeah, I totally respect that. Like there's different types of scientists, and they also necessarily can't talk to someone. It's about the different type of brain that you have, right? And your ability to lead and to even just do these things that are maybe not the fun thing, but depends on who you're asking, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of these really crazy inventions they're not always looking to solve a big commercial problem. They're usually trying to solve a scientific problem. Yeah. And they don't necessarily envision, having solved it, what's the real market application for this new way of doing whatever it is, right?
Sure.
And so again, you need sort of a translation of, oh, you can do that. Well, this is an industry where this would have a huge impact. And so, having someone that kind of has been there, has some experience in the market, understands the customer needs, can position the company directly or the technology correctly on what problem are we solving and what's the value of this solution to the market is critical ultimately to raising the next rounds of capital and building a real company around it.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting as well about this whole idea of, because it makes sense. I mean, you could get someone to move to New Mexico, but all of their contacts, everyone that they know doesn't live there. So that's why eventually, right? So are there any different types of unique opportunities you've seen? Is it kind of like when we had COVID and the government subsidized employees? Was there a way to get more of these people into the places where they can be, really take hold? But otherwise, I mean, it's like, okay, a couple of years and the trend is, like you said, 100%, they're not going to stay. So what is your long-term plan here?
Well, I think if they come, they can stay. I mean, like the people I mentioned earlier never came to New Mexico, right?
Oh, okay.
We hired them. They kind of managed the company virtually. They came physically periodically, but they never moved their residence, and then eventually, moved more of the company, so they had to come less. And so if you get someone to come, like when I was in the Southeast, if we got someone to come to North Carolina, they almost always stayed. But there was a resistance to come in originally, right? And so I think there are things that the states can do. A lot of it, I think, people are going to do what's in their financial best interest almost always, right? And so you have to think about what would motivate someone to move to New Mexico or Nebraska or wherever it might be. One of the things that, I really highlighted, I really thought was interesting, but as a thing to always keep in mind, when I was in North Carolina initially, most of our successful entrepreneurs, before they sold their company, established residency in Florida. And why did they do that? There's no state income tax in Florida.
Right. Yeah, right.
And so they're like, with the money I don't have to pay to the state, I can buy a nice big mansion on the beach. But that hurts North Carolina, right? Because, even if you had a win, the company started in North Carolina, some people from North Carolina invested in it. The company was successful. Some people in North Carolina made some money. But if the entrepreneur, who's really the value creator, moved to Florida, he's most likely going to start his next company there, right? And in New Mexico, who's next door to New Mexico? Texas. Also no state income taxes, right? So, I think the strategy that has some chance of working, because the companies can only do so much, like they can't get rid of state income taxes, right?
Right.
And so, the companies are going to recruit the best people they can, and they're going to pay whatever the market requires, but it's not going to include an extra bonus package for moving to New Mexico, for example. They can't afford to do it. And the investors in the company would say, well, why spend that money? He could work from California or wherever he is,
right.
or she. So that's something the state has to think about through public policy. And I think there's things that the state can do around, say, deferring taxes if you stay in the state and run another company, or, whatever that might, look like. I was talking to them. They have a program there, as a quick example, called LEDA, which the state uses to attract companies to move to New Mexico or stay in New Mexico, but it's focused on physical assets. So they'll buy a building for you, and then based on how many jobs you're going to create. So there's a formula. If you create at least 100 jobs over the next 5 years, they'll forgive the debt if you leave the state or whatever. But it's all around physical assets. And, one of the points I've tried to make to many of the policymakers was buildings don't create jobs, people do, right? And so if you could create a similar program where there were incentives that companies could provide as an extra bonus for getting someone to relocate to New Mexico, then you get that job creator physically in New Mexico. Then the people he's going to hire are going to be in New Mexico, and when the company sells or goes public, he's going to have rebuilt his network a bit, right? Or she, and so he's more likely to stay in New Mexico to run the next company. And so there are programs like that around, tax deferment or tax abatement, based on, certain level of jobs being created, maybe again, right? So if you're a CEO of a company and your company grows from 10 to 110, maybe, of course, the company benefits, but maybe there's ways to provide incentives for the individual from the state for creating all that additional tax revenue, et cetera. It's not the most popular thing politically, to just be honest, because we're proposing giving more money to, quote, rich people, right? And so, why are we giving more money to rich people? Well, because they're creating jobs in your state. Why are you giving big companies millions of dollars in a new building? Because they're going to move people to your state. It's the same theory. But for some reason, politically, it's a little bit more immediate.
Unpopular.
Building, Well, and there's like a building, they always feel like, well, I can grab the building back if it doesn't work out and sell it to somebody else, right? But an individual, it's a little bit less, hard asset. But anyway, I do think it's an area that if it's not addressed, you just lose a lot of good companies that even you might be. I mean, what I've seen, again, I'm not trying to pick on New Mexico, but I just have a lot of experience there now. But the same thing was true in North Carolina. You could be really successful getting a lot of companies started, and that tends to be the focus. But if those companies ultimately leave, then you're not getting that return on investment. It's just like if you send all your kids to, like New Mexico has a free tuition for New Mexico residents, that have a certain grade point average or whatever. You send all those kids to UNM or New Mexico State, and they all leave the state when they graduate to take jobs in New York or California because there's not jobs that are relevant to them in New Mexico. All that investment, you never got a return on it because those people leave the state. So you're educating people for other states, right? So
that was actually my follow-up question to you, is kind of thinking about, now all this displacement that we're coming up on and AI, right? Just thinking about self-driving cars as one example of massive displacement. And there's really nothing happening to start training people to do something else, right?
Right.
And, is that another opportunity to say, hey, we as we're going to create more opportunities for this specific type of work that can't be done by AI. And then there are going to be more people that are interested in coming.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you are seeing is sort of like we talked about earlier in terms of being every country looking to be a little bit more independent and self-reliant. So you are seeing in the U.S. a lot more manufacturing coming back to the U.S., partly because of the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
And that manufacturing cannot be done by AI. I mean, you can't build a car with AI, or you need robotics. You need, a certain amount can be done without people, but a certain amount needs actual people doing things to create these different products. And then I've heard that even in AI, you're going to need millions of electricians and plumbers and things
Absolutely.
like that. And so there's a lot of jobs that, again, are require a physical person, like if it's to build a house. I mean, they're trying to build houses using robotics and
they're printing them now. I'm like, wow,
right.
That's so weird.
But still, you need someone to,
pour the paint in or whatever, however they do it.
Yeah, someone's got to buy the land, someone's got to show up and, dig a foundation. I mean, maybe it's a robot that does it, but someone's got to supervise it. So there is, I think, with the growth and kind of onshoring of manufacturing and a lot of these other kind of real jobs that real people have to do, that is a shift. It used to be everybody said, let's teach everybody how to code, right? Because that's the next generation. Is if you can't code, or if you can code, there's a limitless number of jobs that you can qualify for. Well,
not the case anymore.
AI is doing a lot of coding now, so.
But you still have to have a real developer supervise.
Right.
Or you do. I mean, it's the same thing, AI can hallucinate but you need to have someone review it, right? That does read JavaScript. But of course, it cuts definitely back on how many people need to be in their chairs, right? Butts and seats.
Yeah. No, it's a challenge. And I think it's definitely a challenge for every country today in terms of as AI gets more and more capable, as robotics gets more and more capable, what are the jobs that are sustainable for individuals? And I think a lot of it is kind of in the manufacturing area, and a lot of these kind of electrician, plumbing,
massage therapists, things like that. You can't have that. Would be really odd, right? To have a robot,
Well, that's probably coming.
Probably. Question for you is just some people who are out there listening to this podcast and who they might have a great idea and they've been really searching for capital, or what is your recommendation? Do you think that one way to go about it would be to look at what state opportunities exist? Should they be leaving their ecosystem, or they should be dialing down deeper?
Well, so if somebody has a great idea that they think could turn into a great company, I think in general, most people start number one with a lawyer to actually create a company. A lot of times, if you pick there's lawyers that do a lot of work with the venture community. So picking a lawyer that's kind of well connected into the capital that might be available in the local community is, I think, a good strategy for initially finding support, because you're not going to go to Kleiner Perkins or some of the big firms day one. In most cases, you got to get started. You got to have a prototype or proof of concept, or even on the soft tech side, a website or some software that's been developed to kind of demonstrate what you're thinking about. And so that's almost always going to be the 500,000 to 2 million or so initially to kind of get going, get to the point where you're presentable. And again, you probably need, depending on the track record and the experience of the folks connected to starting the company, you ultimately do need, I think, in most cases, to have somebody on the team that knows how to build a company, has built a company before, knows the questions that are going to be asked by the investors, and knows how to answer those questions, right? And can really put together a pro forma financial forecasting, what the cash requirements are going to be, what the business model is going to be, what the market opportunity is, and all those kind of things. So, I think knowing that you've got to build, you don't need 20 people day one, but you need, 3 or 4 people day one between developing the product and running the business and attracting capital, attracting customer interest. Because even before you have a product, you really want to be talking to potential customers and understanding, are you solving a problem they care about, right? And we always talk about kind of nice to have or need to have,
Right.
And if you're not in a need to have category, it's going to be hard to enter the market. There's just a lot of competition out there. I mean, I get all the time, people coming in saying, hey, we got this idea, and all we need is 1% of this huge market to be this huge company, right? The market's 50 billion. If we have 1% of that, we're like 500 million or something, right? The problem is that 1%, it sounds like a small number, 1%.
That's
Nobody's giving you 1%.
No, but being a marketing person, that's a bigger scoop than you think it is, right?
Yeah, there's competition.
You're gonna have to market to 20% at least, right? To get 1%, yeah.
Yeah, people are all trying to grow their market share. So, even though it sounds like 1%, nobody cares about it. They won't even notice us. There's nobody that's just sort of giving away 1% in any market. So understanding, we're looking for companies that we think could be 20, 30% of the market because their ideas are so disruptive. So understanding, the competitive landscape, how you're going to enter the market, why somebody's going to buy you or buy your product. And again, if it solves a problem they even really care about, I think is critical.
Awesome. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
So my email address is just Dave, DAVE, at Cottonwood, like the tree, .VC, venture capital.
Excellent. Well, we're going to include those links. And if there's any other links you want to share, we'll include them into the episode here. Thank you so much for joining me. And to all my listeners, join me next week as I interview another industry expert and topics to help you succeed on and offline. I want to extend my deepest gratitude. We are now at 110,000 subscribers. That is because of you and your aloha and support. Please, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, do so I can get more great guests like Dave on to share their wisdom with us. And I will see you next week in the Pixels. Aloha. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Covert Code Podcast. If you're loving the insights we share here, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more digital innovators like you. Share this episode with your friends and colleagues on social media and help spread the word. And if you're in the solar space or just curious about where clean energy is headed, I'm thrilled to announce my brand new podcast, The Solar Coaster. This show digs into the real stories, trends, and challenges of the solar industry, with bold conversations and powerful takeaways you won't hear anywhere else. Follow The Solar Coaster now so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the Pixels. Aloha.